Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's program, Building the Lean Muscle in Your Nonprofit. My name is Max Smith. I'm the Communications Director for 501c Services. And 501c Services is a 100% employee-owned company that provides alternatives to state-run unemployment insurance programs. We also provide HR services and other mission-friendly assistance to more than 2,500 nonprofits and tribally owned businesses nationwide. Many of you joining us today are already working with us, and I really appreciate you for doing so. Real quick, before I introduce our speakers today, I have some housekeeping to get out of the way. We will be taking questions throughout, and I just want to warn everybody that today's program is very interactive. Matt and Adam will be asking you to do things today. So as you go along, I'm sure you'll be able to push questions to them directly. It's not going to be like a typical we'll answer questions at the end, even though we will, but there will be a lot of interaction leading up to the end of the program. So please feel free to shoot stuff as you have it. If you're here for HRCI and SHRM credits, you know the drill. When we're done, a post-event poll will pop up. You need to complete that survey for me. Make sure you indicate what type of credit you're after, one or the other or both. That poll is also included in our post-event email, which shoots to you an hour after the program. Today's materials are already in the handout section of your GoToWebinar browser, so you can download those right now, and they will be included in the post-event email as well. So if you want to follow along, they're there for you right now. Our next webinar will be in a couple weeks. It will be COVID-19 related. I was just laughing with the guys that this is the first non-COVID webinar I've done in 2 months. So this is really nice. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Adam and Matt. They'll introduce themselves. We'll start with Matt. Adam, I'm going to go ahead and send you control. And you guys are welcome. Don't forget to unmute yourselves. And I will disappear and come back later if you need me.
All right, well, thanks, Mac. Thanks for arranging the discussion today, and Adam and I are both very excited to be here. I'm Matt Berdoni. I'm the founder and attorney at Social Sector Legal Services. I launched that almost a year ago after spending 7+ years at Independent Sector as the counsel and director of business development there. So Social Sector Legal Services works with nonprofits and small business clients in DC and Minnesota, and it's matters including entity formation, governance, contract and transactional matters, business and tax exempt issues, and really any type of task related to those things or really otherwise that helps these clients achieve their social purposes. So I launched SSLS because almost every time that I was talking to a colleague or a partner or a leader of an organization and they found out that I was a lawyer, I'd hear the same thing. And it was that the services provided by their lawyers or their outside firms that they engaged or the pro bono service providers they got, they just didn't respond to the specific needs of a nonprofit. And that really stuck with me, and that's really what I've set out to address launching this organization. So we'll touch on momentarily throughout here how the Lean Startup approach is really guided with that. But before I go any further, I wanted to introduce today's co-presenter and all-around good dude, Adam Burke. So Adam, I'll kick it to you.
I like those kinds of introductions, break the ice a little bit. Can you see, I'm bouncing around on, I was hoping not to do this. Can you see Matt and I, or can you see my screen still?
I see both of us.
All right, let me get, every time I touch anything, it goes back. Now it's, oh, I was hoping this wouldn't happen, but we promised we would be vulnerable on this call. All right. So now you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I just ate into some of my introduction time, but I feel like you got to know me. That's kind of my style. So I come from a startup background, so the quintessential failed founder led me to literally ask, what problem are we actually solving with a co-founder about 15 years ago? LinkedIn, I still keep my original startup in the sharing economy on LinkedIn, and it reminds me, it seems like a year or two ago, but it was actually like 15 or 16 years ago, trying to solve some problems sharing goods in apartment buildings. I got to a point, what problem are we actually solving, which led me to really develop that empathy muscle, not trying to solve problems for the company or the organization, but trying to solve problems for the end user or the customer or the beneficiary. Now I teach this stuff. I try to avoid the word consultant, but I teach this stuff to some pretty interesting government agencies, Fortune 500s. Just got off a call. The Google for Startups is doing a sustainable development goals accelerator online based on the situation in the world right now, and been coaching teams there as well. And also just hope everyone's doing well. These are pretty interesting times right now.
So just a real quick note or two here on why we talked to Mac and thought this was a good topic for this audience and just for nonprofits in general. So Adam and I were talking a couple months ago related to a project that he's been helping me out with. Like I say, he's very generous with his time. He just referenced that a second ago. He really does believe in this stuff and really takes it to heart and really does what he can to help people like me get moving, stay focused, things like that. So as we're in that conversation, one of us noted that when a business doesn't respond to the needs of its customers, it becomes obsolete, it disappears. And as we dug into that a little deeper, we realized that that's certainly true for nonprofits, but our respective experiences, we either landed on that nonprofits wouldn't agree with that assessment, or they think of it in such different terms that the underlying point might get lost. So in the true lean way, which again we'll dig into here in a little bit, that did stick with me, and I decided to just kind of poke around and do my formal polling. And the next three, I believe it was, conversations that I had with folks in the nonprofit world, I just kind of put that out there along the lines of how often do you talk to people in your target demographic, and are you meeting their needs? Really trying to get to the heart of that that assessment there. And none of them had actually spoken with any constituent. I think it was 6 months at that point, and they all said they were meeting their needs. Well, I guess to be fair, one said they were pretty sure they were, but the other two were definitive yeses. So anyway you break it down, that really is what we were focused on, and we are pretty sure that that kind of a disconnect between the organizations and people they serve is putting nonprofits at serious risk of losing their standing and their credibility in the community, or even worse, could render them obsolete, because it's very possible that if you don't engage your stakeholders about what they need, how do you really know? On the other hand, we do see some clear themes when we're looking at the organizations, agencies, businesses, people who are stepping up and thriving in a world full of big challenges, like the one going on all around us now, and pretty complex needs of stakeholders, ever refining. So several of these themes actually fit together pretty nicely under that single heading of commitment to a lean startup mindset. And for the highest performing organizations, that mindset really is embedded in their culture and their overall operations. So today we're going to give you a crash course in lean startup, provide some examples of the approach in practice, try to give you some tips to fast track. We certainly would recommend that you take a look at the handouts that are in the panel there on the side, and point you specifically to a couple sets of questions that we put together, which will help frame things for today. But they're also for your own use moving forward as you start to hopefully implement some of these practices in your own organizations, or just use it to as a frame of reference to ground your individual work. They're very basic. They may not be perfect, but we're going to reference them a few times here today, and we'll go back and forth in the chat area there about them, and you can refine, revise, whatever. But they really are getting to the core of why is it we're here as organizations. So, so Adam, if you can hit that next slide there, we'll just take a couple seconds here to look these over before I hand it over to Adam. So I'm not going to read them off to you, but take a look.
We'll use this time to test the chat feature, because as Max said, we're going to be pretty interactive here. So even when we start the next section, definitely in the second half of the call is going to be super interactive. But even in some of the background and theory parts that we're about to get into, I've been known to Socratic method, y'all. So
Yeah,
bonus to the first free office hours with Matt for half an hour for the first person. No, I'm just kidding. For me, for anyone, free something if for the first person that puts something in the chat window.
Free something for someone. Can't beat it.
Exactly. Someone put their mission at least. I know we have at least one friendly out there on the call. I won't call you by name, but let's get off the blank slate there. All right, we push things, but we also know when to say when, so we'll give it.
Everybody's throwing their stuff into the questions area, not into the chat area. So
Okay, great.
In the wrong spot. Yeah, they're there. I promise.
So here's one of my favorite things to say, and this will start some of the theory. Either I was wrong, which my wife doesn't think I say enough, so I was wrong, or I don't know. I think I don't know, which we'll get into some of the theory of lean startup around uncertainty and risk and why we do customer discovery. But I don't know and I was wrong are important on the discovery side of things, not necessarily on the execution side, and we'll clarify that in a second. Mac, thanks for pointing that out. Awesome, and thank you everyone for sharing.
All right, so Adam, if you want to take the wheel here, and I think we'll end up being able to circle back into some of these too.
All right, so over the next 10 minutes or so, I wanted to get a foundation. You can see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so I just want to do a quick foundation for lean startup. Even on this last call I was mentioning, I try not to be this lean startup robot and just regurgitate Eric Ries's book. On the other hand, that's what this call is about. So we just wanted to do a quick temperature check. Have you heard of it? Yes or no? Have you heard the term? If you have, what's the first thing that comes to mind? We can start putting questions in the chat or the questions. Mac will help me moderate that, so it doesn't matter, whatever you feel comfortable with at this point. Now I have a new learning. There's two different sources here. So have you heard of lean startup? What's the first word that comes to mind? Have you tried it? Is your organization, have they tried it successfully? Mac, I'm getting a message from one of our friendlies that the chat window isn't enabled. How do I do that?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll try to figure it out, but people should just use the questions tab.
Okay,
That'll
sorry.
work just as fine. Yeah.
I tend to be on the discovery and the breaking side of things, so we'll move right into it. And then that's the search side of things. So I've got very, very comfortable with uncertainty. But to bring it back in, just to have, before I go off tangent again, this slide seems to sum it up. A method to systematically address uncertainty through rapid iteration and market learning. So this, to me, is just another word for the scientific method or for experimentation. And you'll see on the right, the famous, in our circles at least, no circle pun intended, the build, measure, learn loop. Sort of raise your hand if you've seen that. Now another feature here. Raise your hand if you've heard of the build, measure, learn loop, or just chat somewhere if you've seen it before. It's another iteration of the build, measure, learn loop. So basically the idea is not to jump straight to execute, but to start running small tests to eliminate or reduce uncertainty. This is one of my favorite quotes. I spared most of the audience. I think some of you have seen it. I had a bird. When I do this in person, sometimes I have a bird that's literally eliminating waste mid-flight. It's not a pretty sight, but it seems to get the audience attention sometimes. Maybe I'll send it around in a handout. But this is a more specific and maybe a more professional quote. Your ability to learn faster. It's not just out-competing. It's not just access to capital markets. If you put yourself in a position of being vulnerable, and this is sort of why I do this, it's not an act, it's legitimate. If you can be vulnerable, if you can be humble, if you can say, I don't know, it sets you up to be able to learn faster. If you already know everything, and it's important as organizations, because your customers are coming to you to know stuff and to be experts. So you do have to balance it. I'm not saying, you know, totally you don't know anything all the time, but you need to be in a mindset for learning. And to do that, you have to be vulnerable, you have to slow down, you have to admit you don't know everything. We talked about problems. So another huge theme is focusing on the problem you're solving before you jump to the solution. So it was kind of fun. And again, I like to sort of show how the sausage was made. So when Matt and I were prepping for this call, I even included the typo, 3:35. I don't know what date that was or what I was thinking at the time, but I like to, again, show how the sausage was made. But this is not new. It's not easy to implement. We admit it, and we'll go over that in the second half of this call. But it is basic. It's the scientific method. It's understanding customers and users. It's having empathy. It's having a process. It's being aligned to strategy and not just doing things for the sake of doing them. All of these things are simple. Again, I am not going to pretend that they are easy. So again, sometimes I like this roller coaster image, because if anyone can feel themselves going up a roller coaster, the loops kind of, eventually you get the momentum. And if you keep doing it, that's literally why it's developing that muscle. So developing the muscle, if you know it, if you can sort of literally feel yourself, I know no one's been to an amusement park recently, but that first hill requires external, inertia is the wrong word, but external energy to sort of get you up that first hill. So whether it's talking to customers or doing customer development interviews or being humble, some of these things that don't necessarily come natural, forcing ourselves to stay away from the solution and just building stuff or solving problems, that first hill requires a little bit of discipline, I'll be honest. But eventually, if you get in a cycle of closing the feedback loop, getting answers from the market more quickly, eventually inertia will take over. You'll have a backlog of risky assumptions. You'll understand what it's like to run a small test. You'll understand what those learnings look like, and then how to feed those learnings back into your new assumptions. So closing that loop and making it faster and faster and faster, eventually it sort of starts feeding into itself. So I've talked a little bit about speed, scientific method, learning, being responsive, customer centricity, being problem focused over solution focused. So this is one of my favorite slides for just really take a second and focus on the problem, not the solution. Empathy, I mentioned already. A lot of times, you know, I've done workshops where I'll say, what problem are you solving? I remember the moment where my co-founder and I, again, we had a sharing economy startup where neighbors could sort of share a drill. And we lived by that saying, like, you need the hole, not the drill. But the truth was people just wanted to buy drills. It was easier for them. And the ironic thing is, now that I'm a homeowner, I bought a drill. I basically broke every rule that I spent 10 years trying to start my startup around. But when I run those exercises and I say, what problem are you solving? Most times for a new audience, they'll talk about the operational problems that they're trying to solve for themselves. I'm not going to get on a high horse and say that it's selfish. You need to do both. You need to solve problems for your organization and funding and how you're going to be sustainable. But you at least need to balance that with a customer point of view and having empathy for your customers. again, one of my favorite visuals. A lot of times we jump to the low-hanging fruit, and we just start executing, and we execute the things that are sort of easiest and fastest. And there's something to be said about that, to gain confidence, to gain momentum, to start making progress, to show bosses, hey, we're making progress. But the truth of the matter is, you at least need to recognize what your riskiest assumptions are and attempt to start de-risking those up front. Okay, this is probably the most important slide in terms of theory. We'll get to some practice on the second half of this call, but in terms of theory, it's one of the most counterintuitive things at first, but it becomes one of the most important, and you sort of get excited to tackle. It's not just like eating the frog or making your bed, and it goes beyond that. You're literally isolating something that could ruin your entire business model, your entire operational model, or your entire mission. Test it up front if you can, and we're going to give you the tools to do that. It's easier than it may seem. It's not easy, but it's easier than it seems. So I'm going to skip this. This is included in the PDF. I wanted to give credit to Anna Chang. I would say I'm a lean startup expert in my own right, but she's sort of the leader in the lean impact movement. So I just wanted to show my respect to everything I learned from Anna May, and we'll link to her book. There's some really good stuff in there. So again, this was the slide I had in mind when I was kind of fumbling through the handoff and kind of being vulnerable, and it's okay to be messy. You want to be messy in the beginning with intent. So you have some strategy. You want to start with the end in mind. So there's something called the Toyota Kata, starting with the end in mind. We'll send some slides around that. Matt hold me accountable to that one. Amazon is famous for writing the press release first, and then sort of reverse engineering what needs to happen. What are the riskiest assumptions? What are we thinking about? So this is a really important way of thinking about search versus execute. When you're executing, you do want to be the expert, and you want to get it right. And you don't want to just run experiments. Experiments are not an excuse to just do things sloppily or lazy. But you want to balance that out with permission, permission to fail, permission to test things. I'll throw the word psychological safety in there. Like you need to have permission to fail. And it's not just a Silicon Valley buzzword. And I think in this space, especially, sometimes it's harder. Like, we are serving a specific human. We can't fail. And I respect that, but I think there's balance involved. So just interesting slide. We're at the end of the theory. Any specific, let me see, go back to the questions since I'm having trouble with the chat. Any specific questions? Mac, to be honest, if you want to just read them out for me instead of scrolling through, if I'm looking in the wrong place, if we want to take, I think we're doing okay on time. If we want to take 2 or 3 minutes to answer one specific question. If anyone else.
They've been commenting when you've asked them to comment, but there's no specific questions yet.
Okay. So again, my day job on the last, I never thought I'd be like a consultant, so to speak, but I do find a lot of joy, like Matt said, like helping people out, sort of defining, you look at the goal mission on the bottom, sort of helping people lock in what's a 1-year goal, 2-year goals, doing something, whether you've heard of OKRs, objectives and key results. There's a couple of frameworks that help you operationalize this. We find that whatever works for you is fine. But the truth is, being pretty literal about setting your goal mission, locking that in place. Okay, where you're going should be locked in place. But then understanding the problems from the customer's point of view, getting out of the building, credit to Steve Blank, getting out of the building and actually asking people, not just assuming, understanding your how you might solve this, and then going into this loop of what assumptions are you making, and then turning those into a testable hypothesis, learning, and then starting the process over. And so it's going to be a pretty impressive feat if we can do it. And impressive meaning I'll give you the credit, not myself. We're actually going to try to start this loop with 100 people in about 10 minutes. It'll be messy. I keep saying that over and over again, but it is possible. So in about 10 minutes, we will start this process.
So before we get there, why am I here? This guy who doesn't have Adam's credentials, talking mainly about legal stuff, all that. Well, lean has really been essential to the launch of my law practice. It really has, and even more important, I think, to how I interact with clients. So in terms of launching social sector legal services, I mentioned at the beginning that my initial motivation was what I heard from people over the years from my vantage point at an independent sector, and prior to that I was at the IRS and dealing directly with nonprofit organizations, taxpayers on a daily basis, multiple times a day. So really, I first met Adam at independent sector. He was really unbelievably helpful in the early days of launching this new business because he kept me focused on testing, and then listening. So I had the broad outline of what I was trying to accomplish that I intended to build from those earlier interactions with people, that accumulated knowledge. But I committed to the process and embarked on that, what I kind of consider like a subsequent listening tour. Getting out and talking to people who may become clients, people who, looked like them, acted like them, talked like them, from the same places, respected their opinions, whatever it was. And I really wanted to hear what it was that they needed from me, or what they needed otherwise, for sure. And then to test my assumptions about what that meant in terms of me delivering it, and really start to mold and form a more complete vision from there. So what became clear through the course of those conversations is pretty obvious, I guess, in the end, but maybe not. If you want to find out the best way to solve somebody's problems, or, in my case, my client's problems, I have to listen to them. And that's really at the heart of lean as I've embodied it, to ask the question, listen to the answer, ask more questions, listen to more answers, formulate that rough idea in response to what it is you're hearing, and then how it lands, and just kind of repeating that process like Adam was going through a minute ago. So as I formulated and tested, I began to have more structure to my questions and focus on specific topics and areas of interest. And that process is ongoing, and I suspect always will be. Those feedback loops just get shorter and shorter, and the mission gets more defined, the set of services more defined. So I can speak from experience, like it really has. Being in the same room as peers, through various bar associations who are also launching their own practices. I'm not saying I'm way ahead of the game or anything like that, but I see them stuck on things like, what do I name it? How does a website designed? And it's really focusing on a lot of building an image before they're understanding what it is they're trying to accomplish. So I think that really hits on exactly what we're talking about. But the second reason I'm here, and I think this is more important, lean's become an essential tool for me when I interact with clients. It helps me to deliver the types of legal services that are responsive to the needs of nonprofits and the specific needs of a client organization. So that's what I heard, a long time ago, and consistently was missing. That missing piece that I can help provide. So, laws, legal documents, none of that exists in a vacuum. It's applied to the world around us. What lean provides is a framework for that, to better collect and process information in a purposeful, unbiased way. So that feeds into an ongoing analysis of whether your activities are advancing your mission, and equips you to adjust course as necessary. So in the same way that lean helps an organization find its role in the world, around how that world is changing, it can also guide the evolution of your risk tolerance, your approach to collaboration, your governance structure, all that type of stuff. So that's why that's top of the list when I'm working with clients. The better and more routinely they're thinking in that way on their own, the more effectively I can serve them, and the more effectively we can work together to really start responding to those deeper, more complex needs. So you put all this together, and it's lean helps me understand the legal needs of my clients. It helps clients themselves identify and articulate what their needs are, and that enables us to work together to ensure that those needs are met. So approaching client service this way, I've noticed some pretty clear trends of organizations that are thriving versus those that aren't. I think we got to maybe go back one slide, Adam. Just hitting on this real quickly. So legal matters actually end up being a pretty good indicator of lean adoption in an organization because, for one, it's pretty easy to peel away the distractions and focus on what problem you're trying to solve. And if a client is willing and committed to doing that anyway. And two, legal documents, business processes, they're really great tools for creative problem solving, again, if the client is willing and committed to doing that. So what you see in these lists here, this is how the lean mentality shows up in a positive, productive way when it comes to the types of services that I provide, as compared to maybe some not so productive or beneficial ways. So, you know, I really invite people to look at this list, and, you know, it may seem kind of, you know, abstract at the moment, but, you know, take a minute, think about where you might fit in these categories, maybe in between something like that, and how you might be able to leverage these types of operational or transactional activities to start building that lean muscle in your organization. Because, you know, at that bottom right corner there, ultimately, legal documents, business processes, things like that, they absolutely are tools that can be used to advance mission. And the organizations that I work with, the small businesses I work with that are not just the most successful, but really having the greatest impact in their communities, you know, making the most progress towards what it is they're trying to do, that's how they think about it. It's not, you know, this goes back to really the core of what we're talking about here. It's everything with a purpose, right? If the purpose is just to get a piece of paper out there that says who's liable for what, well, you can go online. I mean, I shouldn't give away my business, but you can Google that and find something that'll work. What you want is something that responds to what it is you're trying to do and helps you do it. And it lays out what everybody's up to, that type of thing. So we don't need to go into too terrible much detail with that. But I do want to hit real quick an example that might help us, you know, liven up the conversation here. So I've been working with one client to develop and implement a contract management process. So they wanted to do that after they had a dispute with a customer that could have been resolved pretty quickly had the person who put the contract together used the right template. They didn't, and there they were. The urgency, so to speak, of that project increased quite a bit when that company missed a couple of contract renewals. So the CEO came into the picture at that point, and along with it, an idea to have an app for all employees to monitor accounts from the field. So you'll see a slide that Adam has a little later that actually, I didn't see it until after I had written this all out, but it really lays out like this exact scenario almost. And it's a pretty common scenario, honestly. You know, you start to get into a problem, you just overlook it and really start to go into the bigger, better thing, whatever it is. And before long, I was being handed or offered a development budget of $25,000, $30,000 and unlimited access to staff so I could just get this app rolling. And I suggested we just take a step back for a minute and refocus on what it is we were there to do. What problem were we trying to solve? And that, in this particular instance, was how can we prevent missed contract renewals? So this is a CEO in one of those, you know, thriving type organizations, and they have a lot of natural lean type inclinations as it is, and we've, you know, worked together to really adhere to some of the process. So pausing to refocus, you know, it really helped them just, you know, quickly identify a more direct solution that we could test and move beyond just that solution if we needed to in the future. So that led us to an office administrator, and she had a contract tracking spreadsheet, but just didn't notify anybody when these renewals were coming up. So it was a pretty simple trial business process. And as a result of that, she would reach out to people a couple of weeks in advance of when these contracts were about to expire. So the account leads would go out, proactively contact the customers. So in the process then of talking to the account managers to make sure that that process was working smoothly, it was an opportunity to engage with that level of staff and talk them about the types of data that they need to input and how they might do it in furtherance of that bigger picture app development, right? So it all eventually ties together. You can accomplish all these things. You just, it's important to be mindful of what's right in front of you and start to feed it into that bigger process. So again, we'll see a slide here in a little bit that really touches on this. At the bottom, there's a, I think it's like your app or something. It's labeled, and compared to the Apple one and the Google one above it, it's very clear. And again, this is something I've seen personally a number of times, and I'm sure Adam's seen way more. So last but not least here, just going back to or Adam, if we want to pause for 2 seconds to go into questions here. Otherwise, I can maybe just tee us back up with the focusing people on those questions, that first set of questions. Answer these and don't overthink it. What's your mission? What do you do? Those questions. But each of these connects to important operational legal considerations. So in addition to helping ground your lean implementation efforts, they really double as a roadmap for assessing your ongoing qualification for tax exempt status. So as nonprofits, you always got to have that top of mind. If your mission and operations are not in alignment, you risk having that, not just not having the impact you want to have, but risking your tax exempt status, which is not a place you want to be. So this type of analysis helps you really recalibrate as you need to adjust. And interestingly enough, like a lot of the lean stuff, as you go through, keep good notes, make sure you're systematic in how you approach this. And if you do that, what you're left with is a record of your organization taking active steps to evaluate the charitable character, the charitable nature of your work. And you never know when it could be handy. As a former IRS guy, I would say that would be something that, I don't want to weigh in definitively here, but I'd certainly say that if I saw that among piles of other papers, it shows a different level of thought and good faith that otherwise might not be there. So, just a little added bonus of doing the lean process the right way. Related to that, knowing who you serve informs your understanding of legal risks, things like where your client's coming from, or they, what obvious risks are they bringing in, but those ancillary risks, and everybody's coming from somewhere with a number of bags in hand, right? So really understanding that, this goes back to the empathy thing. If you really understand your customers, your clients, your users, you have an understanding of not just what it is you're talking to them about, but what are those things related to it. And you'd be surprised once you start to pencil it out, what kind of comes into focus. And on your services, again, it's articulating what you do, how you do it, who you do it for. That's essential to a comprehensive analysis, not just of your risk, but of untapped opportunity. And that includes opportunity to supplement your revenue. So this is where lean comes in huge in 2 ways. First is the lean approach is by far the most reliable, cost-effective, easy-to-access tool to identify potential revenue-generating opportunities, which is important for every nonprofit, really, and then to build them into something real from the ground up with that user focus. But second, as you go through that process step by step, you end up, this is another example of generating really a trove of material that's directly relevant to the analysis of whether the revenue you generate is going to be subject to unrelated business income tax. In the right hands, actually, it gives you kind of a window to adjust how you do these things so that maybe you're more likely to avoid that tax, whereas a different type of structure or different type of focus, you wouldn't. So these are really important considerations to have in play as a nonprofit. Too much of that type of thing, too far afield from your mission, it is distracting you from your mission in a very real way, but it's also going to subject you to, tax and potentially worse. So, this information is useful for sure, just for record keeping and accounting purposes internally. Again, do the process right. It has multiple benefits, but in response to inquiries from tax authorities, and if you're proactively looking for a private letter ruling, for example, you want to go out and get that, stamp of approval, so to speak, that this is okay to do, or, you're not going to be subject to tax, whatever it might be, you really have assembled the lion's share of materials you need in order to do that. So you're doing it the right way. You're putting these materials together. So just, there's multiple lines of benefits to doing this process the right way. So I'm going to hand it back off to Adam and just say to keep all this in mind moving forward. This concept of using this information in multiple ways, it really is showing you how all this ties together when you're doing it right.
Caught me on mute there. So, all right, so we've got 20 minutes left. I mean, take a big deep breath. I'm glad to see I figured out while Matt was going, I figured out the questions versus chat. So I'm happy to see that there are some questions in there. We promised ourselves that we wouldn't just use the question time as a buffer to kind of go over time. So we're gonna stop. We're gonna do a hard stop at 10 minutes before the hour, no matter where we are, so we can answer questions. I'm gonna go through my experiment piece pretty quickly and then just make an offer to anyone that's on the call. If you want to turn a hypothesis into an experiment, I will help you run the first one as I'm known to do. I also just want to quickly address, I want to go backwards, not forwards, which is not always a great idea when you're trying to get through the last 20 minutes. There's a couple questions about lean versus lean startup, lean versus design thinking, and they're valid, and I think it's really interesting. The simplest way, I'll tackle the lean manufacturing versus lean startup question, and then we'll get to the design thinking and sort of customer discovery part in the question and answer. I think lean manufacturing was designed to reduce waste, like literal waste on a factory floor. And then lean startup obviously was built on top of that. Eric mentions it many times that that was literally his inspiration. That's the name. And so lean startup is then changing from waste to uncertainty. And the most uncertainty is usually around brand new things. So if you follow that logic, I would say that yes, lean manufacturing is on improvement, process improvement. Lean startup is meant to address the search factor and sort of the uncertainty around brand new things. Okay, so we're going to try a little experiment here. I'll give myself 5 minutes, and then again we can take it offline. So we don't have time for this quote, but it's in your handout. I love it, and so maybe it'll inspire you as well. So this is sort of my corny play on words. I think, therefore I am, testing my hypothesis. So that's what we're going to try to do now. Again, rushing through this works better in person, but if you actually check under your seat, you'll find that there is not a hypothesis waiting for you. But if you check in your computer, there kind of is. So we're testing the riskiest thing first. Sometimes I was joking with Matt before this. Sometimes this next 3 minutes takes a full year to teach in an organization or a government, but we're going to try it anyway. So I want now that we're playing along in the questions and the comments, I want someone to think of a customer or a person or a human or a beneficiary, whoever you're serving, whoever you're supposed to be having empathy for, not something inside of your organization. There's no problem with solving things internal. It's just not what this specific exercise is going to be. So I want you to think in your head of who that person is. And I want you to try to semantically follow this format and write it in the questions. We believe this number of this segment, that's the segment I was just talking about, will take this action. This action is the part that is sort of the definition of the experiment. It doesn't have to be the full product. It can be the proxy for the thing you're trying to test. So that's sort of where I may overcomplicate this. If you're running an event, you might not be able to test how many people show up for the event, so there may be proxies about how many people pre-purchase tickets, how many people even agree to come to a customer discovery phone call with you. You may test that the problem you think you're solving is the problem you're solving by some sort of subjective rating system. We believe this is a problem, we're going to talk to 10 people, and then at the end you just decide, is this really a problem worth solving? And by this date, I left that in there on purpose. It's a month from today. You hear sometimes sprints and terms like that. Yes, not everything. I understand fiscal years and quarters. I worked at Pearson, the education company, for a while. I definitely ran into the case where my job was to push everyone to say, hey, you can learn this faster. And yes, there were some antibodies in the organization saying, well, hey, we were, hey pal, we run on school years. We can't find that out until the end of the year. To which I would try to say, yeah, I understand that, but maybe you could test something with the midterms that you were otherwise testing for the finals. Can you get an 80% good answer in 1% or 25% of the time? So again, just do your best. We knew this was going to be a push. I promise I will, anyone that even makes an attempt or contacts me after, I'll help you with this exercise. But you should be able to take an assumption you're making, turn it into a hypothesis, and excuse me, and actually run an experiment, something more than you think you even were able to do in a much shorter period of time. If this seems overwhelming, I totally understand. Try your best to even like Mad Libs, at least get to the segment. Who are you aiming at? Start thinking of a number. Can you reach 5 of them in a month? 50 of them? 100 of them? And like I said, anyone that even attempts to put this in the question section of the gets bonus points, but everyone on the call, I will help if you want my help after this. So I'm going to hand it back over, just literally looking at time and wanting to save that 10 minutes for questions. I can go through some of these slides as we answer questions. This was the one that Matt was talking about, and that's a good segue back to him.
Yeah, and I want to make sure we reserve this time too. So just real quick here. I mean, if you look at that slide and you have the handouts, I mean, it says it all, and that's real. I can't remember if it's Apple or Google, but one, if not both of them, went out to the street. They did what Adam was just talking about. Figure out a way. Go out to the street with a piece of paper and a circle on it, or a piece of paper, and ask people to touch a part of it and see where they touch. Like, that's your roundabout way to start figuring out how an iPad's laid out. Like, it's really pretty amazing how all this stuff evolves when you start to deconstruct it after the fact. It all tracks, right? So you just get yourself started somewhere, make sure that it's for a purpose, it's with a focus, that you're really keeping track of what you're doing and how you're doing it. Don't get distracted or dissuaded at all by getting the perfect numbers there. I mean, that is really just where inaction is just the absolute worst thing possible here. Just start moving, and it'll start to fall into place. It really is that simple. We can skip the funding stuff. That's totally fine. This will give you a new way to do things, and it's a way of doing things that is prime. It's really just great for proposals, reports, whatever it is. So once you start doing this, you'll realize, like, hey, I'm doing things in a different way, and I'm really responding to my constituents in a different way. I bet you the people who give me money are going to want to know a little bit more about that. It's that simple. So,
all right.
Let's see what we got here.
We'll leave this slide up. Sort of addresses some of the optimization questions, the newness question. You could say that design thinking is sort of understanding the problem. So are they actually, why is a skateboard more ideal than or less ideal than a motorbike? What are they trying to do? Do they care about pollution? Do they not care about pollution? Is it speed? Understanding the customer and understanding the bottom layer of that, I'd say, is more of the traditional design thinking, customer centricity part. You could say some people have said, design thinking solves the first part of discovery, of knowing what you should build. Lean startup then starts to test the product itself and the solution, and then agile sort of helps you scale. That's one way of looking at it. I think they're more interconnected than that. Sorry, I thought I plugged in my computer.
Matt, take over.
And I was actually going to point us back to the slide that has the breakdown on here too, because
which one?
Yeah, given that you're monkeying with the power cord there, I don't know if I'm really putting you on the spot here, but
I'm good. I'm good. Quick recovery. Fast feedback loops.
You throw a quick example at that. Fill this out once, just off the top of your head, based on experience.
So I was gonna have this slide ready anyway. So we believe that 25 of you all, I'm cheating a little bit in the purple, this segment, will take this action by today, which is attending this webinar or maybe measuring. I will put myself on the spot. As we've seen, I'm staring at the attendees, 55 to 48. So maybe my initial was, we believe that 48 of 55 of you all will stay on the webinar for the full hour by the end of the webinar. Obviously, that's more of a time-bound literal test than an actual sprint. But it's being, if you've heard of the term, the SMART hypothesis, so specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-bound. A lot of my job, and I'm not a glutton for punishment and I'm not a bully, is really locking people into each element of that statement, because it's not about laziness. Just people tend to overlook, like, oh yeah, they're going to do it. Well, when are they going to do it by? How many of them? Is one enough? Is 100 enough? What are they actually going to do? Are they going to do something meaningful? Or are they going to do something that you're just going to, tick off a box? These things are hard. But if you start putting the entire phrase together, that's why I like to do this semantically. It has a lot of power because you can see where it breaks. If you're just focusing on metrics, yeah, sure, you can get 1,000 people to do anything. If you were just focusing on the action, you could get, one person to stay on this webinar probably for the rest of the day if we were answering the right questions and tailoring it to them. If you made the date, a year out or 2 years out, sure. Or it would just be so long that half the people would, be at a different role and it wouldn't matter. When you have to balance the equation, it gets really, really hard, but in a good way. So that's really all, and that's basically what I do for a living, is try to force people, guide people, force is a terrible word, guide people to actually balance this equation and try to keep this date in the beginning as they're practicing around 2 or 3 weeks. Eventually, yes, your experiment could last a quarter. Sometimes it could last a full year, depending on, if you're putting rockets in space or finding, not to make any light at all, but if you're finding cures to a disease or a vaccine or something like that. But even that, they're doing different things. The FDA is making different changes of expediting that process. So things can be rushed without losing quality.
I'd say this as maybe words of encouragement or I don't know, but having enough experience working with nonprofit folks, especially in this realm, my experience is that you love the SMART metrics, love the really truthfully overly complex plans and strategies and ways of laying things out. All this is really doing is breaking it down to a much more manageable level and making sure that whatever it is those end goals are, they actually matter. It doesn't allow you to design that very end, like what you normally see in a grant proposal, for example. You've laid out what you're going to do before you've really done any of the legwork to start to work toward it in a lot of cases. It's flipping the process in the right direction. And if you approach this as, hey, this is going to help me do a lot of the things I'm already doing, just in a more focused, organized, deliberate way, keep that open mind and you can really start to make some hay with this pretty quickly. I say that from experience. Personally, I say it from experience dealing with plenty of other organizations. Stick with it. It's not going to take long and you're really going to start to see some benefits from it. And it's also a language that a lot of funders are starting to speak for sure. So the more you incorporate it, embody it, you're going to get those results. And you're also going to have a story to tell that a lot of your peers might not. So, you know, take this to heart, work on it, practice it. And again, Adam's here, I'm here. We're trying to kind of build up a community of practice around these types of things in whatever ways we can. So certainly open to suggestions for how we can continue to help you out as you start to dig into this. Yeah, I'm open to anything on that front.
I want to ask a final question, otherwise I'll start. I think there's plenty of documentation on the lean versus agile and design thing. So I won't shy away from the question. I will send around materials to the list. Does anyone want to ask one bonus question? Otherwise, we'll give you 4 minutes. I know everyone's days are super hectic these days. We can give you back 4 minutes, or here, I'll keep my eye on the chat window. If you have somewhere else to be, our metric will be met. So if 42 starts dropping off, we won't hold it against you. But if a couple of people want to stick around for a minute or two and ask a specific question, happy to stay on until the end of the hour. Or we'll hand it back to Mac. If Mac's got something he wants to announce.
No, we will, everybody who submitted questions, these guys will get them, and they should be able to follow up later on. And we will also shoot out their contact information later today. So if you need anything from anybody, just let us know. Other than that, gentlemen, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, and Adam, flash up that last slide that's got our contact information on it too.
Let me see that maneuver. I'm looking at Dory and Carrie. I would definitely get in touch with both of you. And yeah, Matt, can you make sure we save this question window, and I'll make sure that these last couple questions that are coming through, I will go through them personally.
Absolutely, no problem.
Let's see here. All right, here we go. Oh, did I lose it?
Oh,
no, you're good. You're good.
All right, thanks everybody. Thank you, Mac, again for having us.
No problem. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Have a great holiday weekend.
Be well, be safe.